In case you can't tell from my shelf behind me, I'm a big Pixar fan. They're my favorite film production company, and they've made a bunch of my favorite movies of all time. So today I wanted to take a look at all 21 of the movies that they have currently released and rank them from my least favorite to my favorite. And in case you're wondering why I'm only releasing this as part 1 right now, well, that's because there's 21 Pixar movies. There's no way I'm going to be able to talk about that many in one video, so you'll just have to bear with me. And I'll just get started right away with the worst Pixar movie being Cars 2. An opinion I'm sure many people share. You're not surprised to hear me say that, and I don't want to talk about Cars 2. It has very few things I like about it and many things I dislike, so I'm not going to talk about it. I'm just going to go straight on to the next movie, which is Monsters University. I know some people like Monsters University, and I kinda don't see why. To me, Monsters University is a prequel that didn't need to exist. And I'm sure, again, that's not an unpopular opinion. Why do we care to see the characters from Monsters, Inc. in college, where they supposedly met, despite in Monsters, Inc., they state that they've been friends for years, since their childhoods. Speaking of that, though, I really don't like the treatment of Mike and Sully in this movie. They're both very different seeming characters from the first movie. And I don't like that apparently their friendship comes from being mortal enemies and then being forced to be in the same fraternity or whatever, just so that they can get into the scare program. Even though we've seen that there are other schools in the monster world, and I don't even think you need a degree to be a scarer. I'm not really sure. Also, I just think that the animation is pretty good, other than most of the background monsters look very generic, something not even Monsters, Inc. had. Overall, Monsters University is just the first of many Pixar movies I will be talking about today that just does not need to exist. Besides Cars 2, but I'm not, talking about that one. Coming up after that is The Good Dinosaur. Oh, what a disappointment. You'll probably hear people say for many years that this is one of the most disappointing animated movies ever released, probably especially amongst Pixar. Without a doubt, not counting the outright bad one, this is Pixar's most boring movie, because so little happens, and what does happen takes forever to happen between things happening. I do like the main characters somewhat. Arlo and Spot, they're fine, and I like the way they build their friendship as the journey goes on, but the journey takes forever for anything to happen, and it's boring. And yeah, the scenery is great. I really love the background animations in this movie. Those alone are some of the best things Pixar has made. But the characters are so cartoony and barely even fit into the world. They just stick out like a sore thumb. I'm original. I guess I like the ending somewhat, but it leads to a really stupid thing that I just don't understand. You probably know what I'm talking about if you've seen this movie. But it's maybe the hardest Pixar movie to recommend since it is my least favorite of their original movies. Up next, I think I'm pointing at it, it's Cars, yeah. I'm sorry that I don't like Cars that much, but I don't hate it. This is where we're getting into the better Pixar movies now. But the problem with Cars is that it is over long. It's close to 2 hours. And in that 2-hour runtime, not a whole lot happens in the way of plot progression. There's a lot of filler scenes designed specifically to make children laugh, which, you know what? Worked on me. I loved this movie as a kid, and I still like parts of it. For example, the racing scenes are really fun, more entertaining than actual NASCAR, actually. And I do really like the ending that redeems Lightning McQueen's character from being an unlikable jerk to having sympathy. But it's just the middle section where barely anything is happening that keeps this movie from being way more enjoyable. And just the concept of Cars in general isn't that interesting. And then, Cars 3. I know, I like Cars 3 better than Cars 1. Clickbait, what is this? The thing about Cars 3 is that it definitely doesn't need to exist. I think more than any of Pixar's other movies, it has no reason to even exist. But it is the only Cars movie that isn't painfully boring to me. Instead, it's kinda painfully stupid at times. It just kind of treads along the same plot points we've seen in every single other sequel, and the ending, well, you know. But I like the characters in this movie, and I like the scenery and the animation in this movie, and it has fun racing scenes again, something Cars 2 didn't have. I promise I'm going to try to stop talking about Cars 2 for the rest of this video. Just like how Cars 3 did. It didn't even mention anything that happened in that movie. It's lame, yeah, it doesn't need to exist, but it is a fun time and still worth watching if you actually care. But if you don't, yeah, you can skip it. We're finally getting into the more good of Pixar's lineup. Next up is Brave, a movie that people on the internet love to hate on for reasons that I fully understand. The movie's kinda dumb, has weird, DreamWorksy humor, doesn't feel like a Pixar movie, and most importantly, has a lot of plot points derived from the actual Disney movie Brother Bear. And yeah, the mom bear part of this movie is where it kind of loses me, and I just don't have much interest in those scenes. And yeah, the humor is kind of DreamWorks-ish at times, but I like some DreamWorks movies, and so I actually like some of the jokes in this movie. Some of the visual humor, some of the random edits that bring you to an axe being thrown at a statue of a bear. And I really like the first half of this movie that feels more like an adventure sort of movie than it actually ends up becoming. If this was actually an adventure movie, it would be so much better. But yeah, Brave has some definite problems and is a weird part of Pixar's lineup, but I still like it. I find it to be enjoyable and still worth watching, but more than other Pixar movies? Probably not. And next we have Finding Dory. Perfect may be an understatement, says Mark S. Allen of ABC. I don't know what world he lives in, but you know, I kind of thought it was perfect too when I first watched it. Nowadays, I think it's just too much of a sequel. It fits into a lot of problems that sequels have. Basically everything I said about Scream 2 last video applies to this movie. It's far too similar to the previous movie, and doesn't do enough to make itself different. They also have a lot of explanations of why Dory does certain things and says certain things, and how she got to have some of her quirks. We didn't need that. We just know that Dory is a weird, funny fish. We don't need to know why. But I still like this movie for having a good emotional center in Dory and her journey, which is fun. And I think this is a funny movie still. And I do still like it, but sometimes you can just turn the movie off before the last 20 minutes because it kinda... yeah, you know, the truck. But it's still a good, fun sequel, and a worthy sequel to Finding Nemo, if anything, but it's hard to follow up a masterpiece. I'm probably gonna offend a lot of people with this next opinion, but the next one is Incredibles 2. A movie that gets worse the more I think about it. I don't know if I was just enveloped in the hype and excitement of a follow-up to The Incredibles when I first saw this movie with my whole family in the theater on its opening weekend. It was crowded, there was loads of people, I was so excited, and I loved it. I had such a good time, but now, after having seen it again and thinking about it more, I really don't know if I want to watch it again. Because the characters that we knew in the first movie are barely even there anymore. And I'm not going to say the movie's bad just because in comparison to the first, it's different. But when the differences aren't positive ones, that's reason for complaint to me. Dash has no personality, Violet has barely any. I do like Elastigirl in this movie though. I like the action scenes involving her, and just the action in general is still really good. It's Brad Bird. I don't think he can direct a bad action scene. But where this movie falls apart is that its characters are just so much weaker than before, as is the story in general. But with good action and still fun humor, just like the first, and Jack being amazing, he's the best part of this movie, it's still worth watching to me. And I do still like it, even though I'm not sure I want to watch it again, just because I'm scared I'll like it even less. And I don't like disliking movies. So the next one's a hard one to rank, because this is a movie I grew up with, I grew up loving, I've watched dozens of times. It's A Bug's Life. A Bug's Life being the second Pixar movie released right after Toy Story, 2 or 3 years later. And, like, it's so hard to follow up a masterpiece, like I already said. A Bug's Life is still a really fun and entertaining movie to me. I like pretty much all of the main characters. It's got a great ensemble cast, and the villain, Kevin Spacey as Hopper. He's great! Maybe the best thing in this movie. His speech. That scene is one of the best villain scenes in Pixar. And yeah, the animation's a little bit dated, and again, it's hard to follow up something like Toy Story. And if Pixar's other movies weren't so great, I'm sure this movie would be higher. In a ranking of other studios, it would be. I do still really like A Bug's Life, but compared to some of their other movies, it's just hard to put it any higher. Time to offend even more people by this movie not being in my top 10. Inside Out. I really like Inside Out. This movie has really great parts, and a wonderful story, and a wonderful main character, built up of 5 equally deep characters, making Riley one of the most interesting Pixar leads in all of their filmography. Joy is Riley, sadness is Riley. All of them are representatives of different parts of Riley's emotion, and it's such a great way to build a character that I've never really seen done anywhere else. The problems with this movie, though, come when you start to overthink it. I hate this about myself, but I'm a bit of an overthinker sometimes, and to me, as I think about Inside Out's plot and world too much, it really starts to fall apart a lot. And it can make rewatches a little bit difficult as you start to notice that some things don't make sense at all. It's still one of the best Pixar movies, technically. I mean, which is saying something considering I'm still in the lower half. Pixar just has not made many bad movies, so the fact that Inside Out, this movie, is in my lower half of my ranking, that should tell you how good these other movies are and how much I love them. And just barely falling out of the top 10 comes Monsters, Inc. This movie is a very large part of my childhood. I love it so much. It's so hard not to put Monsters, Inc. in the top 10, but when I think about it, it's not really for any huge problems with the movie itself, though I guess Boo isn't really as great of a character as everyone else seems to think. She's got barely any development, but she's still pretty great. That's like the only thing I can think of keeping Monsters, Inc. out of the top 10. It's hilarious. I love John Goodman and Billy Crystal as Sully and Mike. They're like the best Pixar lead pair, really. And also Steve Buscemi, who may seem like a strange casting as Randall, but it actually makes perfect sense. He's great. Everyone's great, really. I like the characters a whole lot in this movie. Again, I like these movies so much. It's so difficult to put them in an order. So that's really the only reason why Monsters, Inc. isn't in my top 10. And I believe that that would be my bottom half. I might put this in the editing somewhere else. We'll see how it goes. This might be a shorter video than I expect. So I'm going to do a quick question of the day for part 1. What is your least favorite Pixar movie besides Cars 2? Let me know down in the comments section below. And so until next time, I will see you next time for my part 2 of my favorite Pixar movies.